Hello. Show number 5. It's been a while since I've done a show, but today we are going to do a show on the Constitution for the United States of America. I have with me a Constitution, my notes of course. I have with me, well, let's go with the Federalist Papers first, and then we have the Anti-Federalist Papers. See what the Founding Fathers' thought processes were. Then I have the Declaration of Independence with the Constitution. We're not going to do the Declaration of Independence so much today, although it's a good document. What we're going to focus on today is the Constitution, and kind of what I'm going to get into is how your rights are being legally taken away from you. And there's a maxim of law. I don't agree with this, but it says that ignorance of the law is no excuse. So this document creates the government, and if you don't understand this and what it is, then you don't understand, well, it doesn't mean you don't understand what your rights are, but you won't know how to understand how to assert them. And I'll be, after going over this again, I studied the Constitution a long time ago. After going over this again, I would not be surprised if this document was not of this earth, because it's pretty brilliant. The only thing is, because some of the they had to get some of the signers of the states that were a little more ignorant at the time to sign it. The Founding Fathers knew that this document wasn't taken all the way, and that in the future there would be a group of people who would take it all the way. And I think that's what our job is here at this time. And I think the Founding Fathers knew this, so it's up to us to finish this. But I want to go over this because it's still genius. It just wasn't taken far enough. So, what is the Constitution? Well, it's a trust, actually. If you look at it, it has all the elements of a trust. I studied trust law. It's a trust that creates a government for the United States of America. There are some people who say it was used as security for the war debt. A security just means it's securing, after the war, the United States was indebted to a lot of, like the French and stuff. The French sold the debt actually to England, so actually it's funny because we ended up owing England the money for the war. That might have been done on purpose. But anyway, Article 1, and the reason why I think this is because Article 1, Clause 1, says that all debts contracted and engagements entered into before the adoption of this Constitution shall be as valid against the United States under this Constitution as the Confederation. So maybe the reason why the Articles of Confederation weren't continued is because they needed to just create this document to secure the war debt. Or some say that the Articles of Confederation didn't centralize power enough. And this document, it's not necessarily a bad thing. The Constitution centralized power a bit more, and that's where we kind of get into Hamilton versus Madison, where Hamilton's the Federalist, Madison's the Anti-Federalist. One of the things you should notice is the Constitution has articles just like a trust. So it has 7 articles, and then it has the Bill of Rights, which is a different document. And then some of the other states' representatives would not sign the document without a Bill of Rights. You notice there was originally 10 in the Bill of Rights, like the 10 Commandments. So that's interesting. And then there are 7 principles, which I'm going to go over, of the Constitution, which is interesting because there are 7 hermetic laws of the Kabbalion for natural law. So I think that's interesting how you got the 10 Commandments and then you have the 7 principles here. Maybe they were modeling it after something. These people knew law, knew trust, knew corporate law more than most advanced corporate attorneys and most advanced attorneys with trust, that know their trust, that do trust. I mean, these people, when they say these were a bunch of hicks, no, these people knew their stuff, they knew their law. So the 7 principles of the Constitution, most people don't even know that there were 7 principles of the Constitution. 1, popular sovereignty. So a lot of people insult, sovereignty is, a lot of these cops do sovereign citizen and stuff and say, oh, sovereignty, that's, you're not sovereign, the government's sovereign. No, actually, popular sovereignty is one of the principles. And actually, there's a case called Chisholm versus Georgia. that states that the people are sovereign over the states. The people are the sovereigns. And we'll get into republicanism, which is next, not democracy. There's nothing about democracy, and they're not referring to the Republican Party. What republicanism is versus democracy is it's where you have rights that are unalienable, and in democracy those rights can be voted away. But in a republic, those rights always stay there. So that's why there are certain unalienable rights, which it says in the Declaration of Independence, that can't be infringed upon no matter, like if it's 1,000,000,000 to 1, you have that right. And again, I went over what a right is. It's anything you can do that doesn't harm another sentient being. So you've broken no law if you haven't harmed a sentient being. So I'm going to give you an example. You know, people think that this is a democracy, and they're running a democracy now, but they're doing it under color of law. And let me explain to you why democracy is bad. And I've given this example to other people, and I convinced them. And by the way, the saying is democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. So that's an interesting metaphor. So here's another example of what democracy is. Say you have a community. There are 10 people in that community. They want to take a vote because they want to use take away one of the people's houses within that 10-person community for a pool hall, okay, or a community center. So they take a vote. 9 vote to take away their house. 1 votes not to. Obviously, that 1 vote is the people that own the house. Can you take away their house? In a democracy, absolutely. That's why the Founding Fathers knew democracy was bad. And if you read the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers, they say democracies die quickly because it's majority rules, and what people feel one day, they may not feel the next. You can play off people's passions and just, there's no law. It's lawlessness. Number 3, so the first 2 principles, popular sovereignty, republicanism, federalism, which is the federal government, separation of power, so you have the 3 branches, and then 5 is checks and balances. Each of those branches are checks and balances to each other. Limited government, I don't know about that one right now, but that's one of the principles. And then individual rights, which goes again, popular sovereignty and individual rights. What is a right? Anything you can do that doesn't harm another sentient being. By the way, this one's going to be kind of longer than the rest, but I think this is really important. So those are the 7. I'll repeat them again. 1, popular sovereignty. 2, republicanism. 3, federalism. 4, separation of powers. 5, checks and balances. 6, limited government. And 7, individual rights. So those are your 7 principles of the Constitution that I don't even know if lawyers know, or attorneys. Lawyers just means a student of the law, and attorney means to tie down, or to attorney means to tie down or to bind. Interesting point, not relevant though. The Preamble. So, the Preamble of the Constitution is basically a trust indenture, or a declaration of trust. And I'm going to read off, and I want you to pay attention. I'm going to read off the Preamble. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. I want to point something out that's very interesting about this, and I'm going to put something up to the screen to point this out, because this has been a very hard concept for people to actually understand. And I'm going to prove it in their words through codes. There are actually 2 different entities established, and there have to be at least 2, usually 2 different entities, because this is a declaration of trust. So you need a grantor, a trustee, and a beneficiary. The grantor and the trustee is the United States, and the signers are the United States. So basically the signers are the grantors, the trustee is the United States, and then the beneficiary is the United States of America, which is the several states united. So the United States is actually a different entity from the United States of America, and the District of Columbia is its own territory. The United States ordained and established the Constitution for the United States of America. So here's my point, and I'm going to show you this. It's right here. 28 U.S.C. 3002 defines the United States as a federal corporation. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go in front of the camera and show you that this is in their code. So it's 28 United States Code 3002. Let's see. And if I knew how to, if I was better with my editor, I would have done it that way. But here it is. It's the United States Code. It's 15, so I'm going to show you. I'm going, and hopefully it's not too fast. And right here, and I'm going to give you a close-up of this, at 15, how's the United States defined? The United States means a federal corporation. So the United States is actually a different entity. Now, where is the United States actually located? And we'll get into this more as we go along. But it's actually located, the United States isn't your country. The United States is actually located in the District of Columbia, and I'll prove that in the UCC. UCC 9307H states that. And the UCC is the Uniform Commercial Code. Each state has incorporated the Uniform Commercial Code into law. So it's commercial law. In Maryland, it's called commercial law. In some states, it might be called the Uniform Commercial Code. But if you go to 9307H, it says the United States is located in the District of Columbia. So here's 9307H, or 9307, okay? Here's the, I'm just skimming through to get to the point. It's H. So this is, this is a hard concept for people. It's why I'm showing it to you. Because I know people that I'm close to don't think this is nonsense, but where is it? H. There it is. The United States is located in the District of Columbia. That kind of looks upside down to me. Am I being dyslexic? You see that? H. The United States is located in the District of Columbia. Okay, so that's their code. That's not me saying this. And that's the big trick that's been played on us, is that when we are claiming to be a U.S. citizen, they're putting us in this de facto jurisdiction. And then also, if you read the 14th Amendment, which is related to this, it says that U.S. citizens are subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Well, if you're subject to something, then you're not sovereign. Okay? And the reason why the 14th Amendment was enacted, actually, in somewhere between, I forget if it was 1961 or 1968, but just after the Civil War. The U.S. citizenship was created to give the slaves a status, because the U.S. citizenship was better than their pure slave status. But if you read the 14th Amendment, and we'll read it later, it says you're subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Well, if you're a subject, if you read that carefully, it's saying you're subject. You're a subject, okay? And it also says in a later part that you can't argue the debt. So when you go into courts, if you're a U.S. citizen and you're arguing debt, then you're going against the 14th Amendment. So that's one of the things we have to be, U.S. citizenship, like I said, was created for slaves, and the ignorant populace was, even the ones that initially weren't slaves were tricked into a subject status for lack of knowledge. What the de jure citizenship de facto means kind of false but legal, and the de jure citizenship was actually the state citizenship, but even that nowadays, okay, so we're still on the preamble though. So what was the purpose of establishing the Constitution? Why was it established? To form a more perfect union, establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, common defense, promote welfare, secure liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Now, there are some people that argue that the Constitution only applies to the posterity of the signers. I tend to disagree with that. I think it just created a government because it was for the United States of America, and if you were born on this landmass, then you are one of the people. So I disagree with that, but I'm just trying to give you all the points people make. The document creates, like I said, creates a government, and government is, here's the thing, government is public law, okay? So this document protects the government from infringing on private rights, actually, is what it really is. Your private rights lie both in your religious beliefs, and a huge one is the contract clause. That's where your private rights are, that's where your real rights are. Understanding the difference between public and private. The government is public. Your rights are unlimited in the private and through contract, okay? And they are to protect your right through Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1, which says, no state shall pass any law impairing the obligation of contracts. And here's a landmark judgment. It was a Supreme Court case. It was Fletcher versus Peck in 1810. The Supreme Court ruled that contract, no matter how obtained, cannot be invaded by state legislation. So in other words, if you create contracts, and there's a legislation, if you create a contract for whatever, the state legislature can't invade it. No legislation can invade it. It's the law of the land, the real law of the land. This is your key to freedom. And by the way, I want to point out, you don't have rights granted to you by the Constitution, nor do you have civil rights, because that means somebody's granting you, so that means some civil authority is granting you your rights. Your rights are granted from natural and divine law. And now some people will say, well, they don't believe in God or whatever. Well, your rights are just inherent. They're inherent rights. So no one grants you your rights. You were born with your rights. My rights come to me from my Creator and from divine law. If you want to just say they're inherent rights, that's fine too. A point is, freedom isn't free. The Founding Fathers, in fact, said there should be a rebellion every 20 years. We don't have to do physical rebellion. The rebellion is up here through contract, knowing how to properly navigate your life and navigate the laws and contract and your spiritual life and using your mind. There were never supposed to be civil authorities. These are supposed to be public servants or public trustees acting on behalf of you. But if you're going to be ignorant of your rights and how to use them, the truth is you may not like what you get. So now, that was just the preamble. Now we're going to go on to Article 1, which is the legislative branch, which is Congress. And I think I'm mostly going to go off my notes. I'm not going to read here so much off of this, because it would, I could go on all day. But there are 18 enumerated, so this is Congress, which is the Senate and the House, and they have 18 enumerated powers. So these 18 enumerated powers are in Article 1, Section 8, and I'm going to discuss the most important points that I believe are the most important points to our situation, which is clauses 3, 9, and 17 of Article 1, Section 8. So Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3 gives Congress the right to regulate commerce with foreign nations, among several states, and with Indian tribes. So Congress can regulate commerce. Now, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 9, the Congress has the right to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. And they started that with the Judiciary Act of 1789. It's an act of Congress. It's not what's called an Article 3 court, which we'll get to briefly later. So these aren't judicial courts. They're congressional courts, part of the judiciary branch, and most of them are actually administrative agencies, not actual courts. They're congressionally sanctioned, and what we call judges are pretty much mostly acting in an administrative capacity. They can put on a hat as a judge, but they're mostly acting in these traffic courts and stuff. They're acting as administrators. And the courts are legal. They're congressionally sanctioned, but the point is they are not judicial courts. So they're kind of acting de facto, because they make you think you're going into Article 3 court. You're going into what's called an Article 1 court. The only judicial court it really is the Supreme Court. The purpose of these congressionally sanctioned courts were to regulate commerce, which is a power that Congress does have. When you get any sort of license, this licensing fraud, you become regulatable under acts of commerce. Licenses, even though it doesn't say commerce on that driver's license, it becomes regular. They're putting you in what I call implied contracts are these licenses, so they can regulate you under their acts is what they're doing. And most of these aren't laws properly passed within the states. So, because there's specific ways that these laws a code is not a law, because laws have to be passed by bill, single item. So you should be asking them to show you the bill when you're going into these courts. But this is how your rights are being taken away, is through these implied contracts. And I want to point out to you, and I think I'll go over this later I'll go over it later. But you have the right to travel in your cars without license and registration. They're hiding it from you. And driving is a term that's used to trick you. Driving is a commercial term for operators of limos, taxis, and the like. But anyway, we'll get to that in a bit. And then the other clause, Clause 17, says Congress shall exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district not exceeding 10 miles square as may, by secession of particular states and the acceptance of Congress, become the seat of government of the United States and exercise all authority over places purchased by consent if the legislature of the state in which the same shall be for erection of forts, magazines, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful things. So here's what's going on with that. But they made this before they knew which states were going to cede the capital, basically. And eventually, obviously, it was Virginia and Maryland. Virgin Mary, isn't that interesting? Birthed a new nation in the District of Columbia. Anyway, that's esoteric, that's another thing. But here's what they are saying. Congress only has jurisdiction in that 10-mile square of the District of Columbia. They can purchase various things like forts and stuff for the military, because that's one of the powers that Congress has and the president has is over the military and creating bases. So they can, the states can cede land over to the United States. Remember, United States and the several states are different. So they can cede land, you know, like when you go into the Department of Energy, you're actually going into the jurisdiction of the United States. When you're outside of that place within a state, you're outside of the United States. And by the way, they use the zip code to create these districts that are like the district of these districts. They're actually overlaying the District of Columbia, so that's a fraud too. I'm not going to get into that in this video. It's not a fraud, but it's trickery. So, in other words, Congress doesn't have the right to compel you to do anything. They only have jurisdiction. They have what's called plenary. It's the plenary power doctrine. They have full jurisdiction and full sovereignty in their territories and possessions. And a U.S. citizen, by the way, is one of their possessions, because what they're basically what you're saying by saying you're a U.S. citizen is that you're a possession of Congress. Let's see if I've covered everything. But if you're really in truth you are sovereign and you're not a territory or possession or property or doing interstate commerce, or are you? And here's where I make the point that if you get a driver's license, you're now regulatable under the Commerce Clause and are subject to state, municipal, and federal rules under the Commerce Clause, which I just went over. It's Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3. And so here's my point. The Supreme Court ruled on the right to travel. They ruled in Kent versus, so I can actually shepherdize it. They ruled in Kent versus Dulles, Thompson versus Smith, and Shapiro versus Thompson that you have the right to travel without a license or registering your property. Okay? So, you know, the whole thing is BS that you have to get a license. It's all commercial. And actually, there's a bill that you can look up, New Hampshire Bill 1778, that got rid of this. It says you do not need a license to travel. You do not need to register your car. What you should be doing is putting your car in your own trust. But anyway, that's for another time. Also, if you're using that Social Security number, that's a federal number. It was never meant to be used for ID, nor was the birth certificate, and we'll get into the birth registration in a future show. Next is, okay, so we're going to go now. So now we know that that's how kind of they're getting the right to vaccine you and stuff, because you're using that Social Security number. If you're taking benefits and privileges, in other words, you're getting checks from the government. If you're using that Social Security number for a bank account, that's federal property. And, you know, you can navigate around that, but what you need to be doing, actually there's a 521 form. You can close that Social Security number out and put all your stuff in trust. Get a private trust. You know, you can even put the trust in your, you know, you can even use your name, which I wouldn't do, but get a private trust. Get stuff out of that Social Security number, because that's federal property, and when you're using that, they can do what they want to you. I'll be honest, because they're getting their plenary power. You become a possession of the United States government. Next is Section 9, powers forbidden by Congress. There are 8 forbidden powers. I have one highlight from this section is no bill of attainders, or what's also called a bills of pains and penalties, or ex post facto law, shall be passed. A crime has 3 elements, okay? When they're charging you with a crime, there needs to be intent, cause, and harm, okay? Can you harm a statute or a code? No. Crimes where there is no harm or intent or a cause of action are bill of attainders and ex post facto laws. And you'll notice if you see most of the crimes, especially the drug crimes, where there's no victim, they're charging these people with an interstate commerce clause, and that's how they get in the conviction. And the lawyers, remember, the lawyers are sort of the bar. The British Accreditation Registry is what that means. They're like their own secret society. They're all brothers. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing, and then they're not defending your rights. Trust me on that. And I'm not saying all of them are bad. I'm not bad-mouthing anybody, but they take an oath, and they're not allowed. They're only allowed to do a certain amount. They're officers of the court, so and their first duty is to the court, and their second duty is to the bar. They're officers of the court. And this is how they're getting all these commissions, and they don't argue that you're not doing interstate commerce. They'll never argue that. So basically they're using color of law to get people thrown in jail, which I think is terrible. Why this is being done is for another show. Or you can ask me and I'll tell you privately if you're watching this show. So next is Article 1, Section 10, which is powers forbidden to the states. 3 clauses talk about forbidden powers, including the contract clause, which we already discussed. One point comes in Clause 1. This one's interesting, and I know the answer to this, but it's too involved for this show. So Clause 1, so that's Article 1, Section 10, Clause 1 says, no state shall make anything but gold and silver, coin, a tender of payment of debts. Is this what's happening? Are we using constitutionally sanctioned money as a tender of payments? If not, are we under the Constitution, or are we being taken into some sort of extra constitutional jurisdiction by using credit and Federal Reserve notes? Way too much for this show. I can't get into that, but it's something to think about and research. By the way, this section also says no state shall emit bills of credit. Are they emitting bills of credit? Of course they are. All money is just debt. You know, that's all it is. If there was no debt, there'd be no money in this form of in this kind of economic system. But this discussion is beyond the scope of this show. But I suggest people do their research. I can give references. Now to the Article 2, the executive branch. This is the executive branch of government. Article 2 of the Constitution, power vested in the President, Commander-in-Chief of the military and militia. I want to point out that nowhere does it say executive orders or laws. Remember, the House and Senate have to pass a 2/3 vote on a bill with a single item, read it 3 times in each House, and then you need the 2/3 vote. And then the President can veto it or sign it, and at that point, it essentially becomes a law. And then if it's unconstitutional, you can bring it to the Supreme Court, and they'll rule it unconstitutional. Anyway, executive orders are a set of rules that apply to the executive branch. This falls under separation of powers. What they have the right to do is delegate certain powers to agencies, and this is called the delegation of powers doctrine. Also, the government has the absolute control of its territories and possessions, which is the plenary power doctrine. I already went over that. I don't have much to say on Article 2 other than that. There really isn't that much on it. Now we come to Article 3 of the Constitution, the judicial branch. The judicial branch is vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as Congress may from time to time establish. Your rights are held in the Supreme Court. The only reason Congress can establish inferior courts is to engage in one of their delegated powers. What they are doing, in fact, in these courts is regulating commerce. And I'll read Article 3, Section 2, Clause 1. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law, equity, and to all cases of maritime and admiralty jurisdiction. When you're going into court, you should be asking the nature of the charges. In other words, is it law, equity, or maritime and admiralty? They'll say usually it's statutory, but according to the Constitution, there's no such thing as a statutory jurisdiction, right? So, what's being done actually is you're being put into a colorable admiralty jurisdiction by a de facto but legal court. It's under color of law because what's happening is you're getting licenses, so you're being regulated under the Commerce Clause, so it's a colorable admiralty clause. Section 2, Clause 3 of Article 3 says the trial of all crimes shall be by jury. Well, in some states, these traffic courts are actually under criminal in most states. So are you getting a jury trial? I don't think so. Anyway, so, if you don't know your rights, then you don't have them. A right is a remedy, and a right is anything that you can do that doesn't harm another sentient being. It's that simple. Article 4, relation of states. The only point that I want to make on this is it says the United States shall guarantee every state in this union a republican form of government. It says nothing about capitalism. It says nothing about democracy. And I already gave my explanation of democracy. It's tyranny of the majority, 2 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. I'm sorry, the truth is the truth. This show's called Truth and Freedom, the Truth Shall Make You Free. I know people are vested in this term democracy because we've been taught it's good, but it's not. You want rights. And by the way, I don't care who the president is or who's in Congress. I worry about myself and what I'm doing and what I'm creating. I don't really worry about any of these people, and nobody should. Already discussed a bit of 6, I don't want to talk about that. Article 7, which is 7 articles, isn't that ironic? Talks about ratifying the Constitution. So let's see. So they ratified the Constitution. There were 39 signers to the Constitution, just in case anybody wants to know. Now I'm going to read off and go over the Bill of Rights. I'm only going to do the first 10 amendments, and then oh, there's Luke whining. No, Luke, I'm doing a show. I'm going to go. He probably has to go. It's bathroom time. Does that mean I'm going to have to hurry through the Bill of Rights? I wonder how long this show has been. Oh, we'll find out. Anyway, so here Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. What I want to point out to you is that your remedy is with your religious rights. And by the way, the freedom of assembly, people say, oh, I have the right to protest, and you do, and to march, and you do, but I think these ways aren't the most efficient ways to handle things. I think, and I'm hoping what I get is a group of people together, create an organization, a charter, and I have one that I created, and it's for all of us, and it can be amended. I want to work with people on it. I just started something. But what we want to do is we want to get people together and assemble together, and then I believe that we can do great things. I believe we can create an organization that changes the world. It's up to us. You know, we're the next generation that's supposed to take over things. So, you know, and I'm very passionate about this, and I'm very passionate about freedom, sovereignty, and going into the new world. Not the new world order, but the new, and we are going into a new age. I'm not into the new age movement or a new world order, but I do think things need to change, and I think people's sovereignty needs to be respected, and I think nations you can look at as individual people, and I think each of these nations ought to be considered a people, but we ought to respect each other, do trade and commerce, and stop with the wars, respect each other's sovereignty as individuals, and come up with a free world. And people should have the right. I actually don't believe in borders. Like if people relate to America, and then other people relate to India, and then other people relate to Russia, then those individuals have the right to go there and help those nations make this earth a great earth. Anyway, that's my take. I'm open for debate on that. So that's one, peacefully assembling, your religious right, you know, become a minister and create your own religious organization. That's what I did. I have my own religious organization. Get some people in it, you know. In my organization, I don't want people. I want all high priests and priestesses. That's the way I look at my religious organization. I don't want people that just want to be told what to do. So in my organization, we're all high priests and priestesses, is the way I look at it. Amendment 2, the right to bear arms, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, some people argue that in order to bear arms, you have to have a well-regulated militia. So if you create, if say a group of us got together and created this entity, and then we would have the right to bear arms without any regulation if we had a well-regulated militia. That's the key to this. Create a well-regulated militia under contract. You read what I said about contract, and then you're good to go. You don't need any license from anybody. You just have to know how to navigate this document. Amendment 3 is just about quartering soldiers. That's not too relevant. 5, 6, and 7, I always kind of confused. 4, 5, and 6, I always confused because they're all kind of about rights regarding like courts and stuff. But the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrant shall issue but on probable cause supported by oath and affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons and things to be seized. Do you hear that? That when people get arrested and there are no warrants, that's what's called a writ of assistance. That's one of the reasons why the Founding Fathers left England, is because they were just like, these soldiers were just coming in and arresting people for whatever they wanted. Now that's what these police are doing. These police are a militia, by the way. And they are a well-regulated militia, actually. It's just, there's a court case. Here's an interesting court case I want to bring up. There's a court case called Warren versus the District of Columbia. Okay, and it created what's called the Public Duty Doctrine. The Public Duty Doctrine says, and you can look up Warren versus District of Columbia, it's more involved, you know, I just quote the punchline. It says the police or government have no duty to protect the people. Let's just say the police have no duty to protect you, okay, an individual, all right? So, an individual, I'm using common parlance because there's a legal definition to that. So, if they have no duty to protect you, this is deductive reasoning. If they have no duty to protect you, you have no right to, there's no requirement to cooperate or perform for them. It's simple deductive reasoning. If they have no duty to protect you, then you have no duty to perform for them. In other words, they're nothing but a citizen when they come and arrest you. And by the way, and that's the public duty doctrine. They have no duty, the police have no duty to protect you. I'll also point out, I've researched this. 1 out of every 13 deaths is caused by a cop, but yet 1 out of every 130, it's somewhere around like 134 people in the country are cops. So 1 out of 13, that's not a good number. And by the way, when you call, if there's an emergency and there's some sort of crime being committed against you, like someone's broken into your house, they only come and save the day 2% of the time. Okay? So when you say, oh, we need police, no, I have the numbers, so I know. So that's what's called the public duty doctrine. I want to make that clear. And that's the Warren versus District of Columbia. The police have no duty to protect. If they have no duty to protect, you have no duty to perform. That's deductive reasoning. Okay. So what points do I want to make on this? They never provide you with a warrant. Oh, look in your state constitutions. By the way, it never says anything about the police. Or at least it doesn't here on the landmass known as Maryland. It's the sheriff is the de jure law enforcement. That's de jure because it's in most of the state constitutions. I haven't read all the state constitutions, but the ones I've read, there's nothing of the police, only sheriff. So where are they getting their delegation of authority from? They're nothing but citizens. They have no powers really. Other than that they have a badge and gun. You know, when someone has a badge and gun and they tell me what to do, unfortunately, I'm probably going to do it, but it's under threat, duress, and coercion, and a lot of times what they're really doing is kidnapping. We got to call it what it is. When nobody's committed a crime and there's no warrant for an arrest, what it is kidnapping. It's that simple. So they have to, when they do issue the warrant, you have to particularly describe the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. Now Amendment 5, rights in criminal cases. No person shall be held to answer for a capital crime, blah, 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 unless, or otherwise infamous crime, unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. How many crimes do you get a presentment or indictment for? Never. Or not unless they're serious, except in cases arising on land and naval militia when enacted several times of war, nor shall any person be subject for the same offense. Nobody can be compelled to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. It's pretty self-explanatory. Amendment 6, in all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial. One of the things you have to do if you're ever arrested for a BS crime and they try to take you forever, you have to say you want a speedy trial, and then if they don't give you a trial, I think it's within 2 months, the case has to be dropped by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by law, and to be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witness against him, and to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Assistance of counsel, not an attorney. Assistance of counsel. And by the way, with the assistance of counsel thing, when they say that you don't have the right to defend somebody else or be an attorney for somebody else, like say me, I don't have a bar license or whatever. By the way, I've never seen a bar license. They don't really get licensed. But anyway, when they say that you have the right for assistance of counsel, that means you can have anybody you want assist you as counsel. And I'll quote Sims versus Aarons and Schwer versus Board of Examiners, the most recent one I believe, and then Sims versus Aarons is shepherdization. It says the right to practice law is a common right. So if we have a contract and you ask me to be your lawyer or your counsel, then no state can abridge the obligation of contracts. It's that simple. And by the way, even without that contract, you have the right to practice law. It's case law. So anyway, that was the 6th Amendment. 7th Amendment is about the value. It's not the excessive bail, not relevant. Rights retained by the people. Amendment 9. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. In other words, just because something's not stated in here doesn't mean that you don't have the right to do it. Again, a right is anything that you can do doesn't harm another, anything that you do that doesn't harm another sentient being, or don't do unto others as you wouldn't want to have done to you. The golden rule said with retroductive reasoning. It's that simple. You know, so you gotta retain and reserve, and then the 10th Amendment is about the 9th Amendment is retaining the rights retained by the states and the people. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or the people. So there you go. Now what I want to do is I want to go to the 13th Amendment. So here's the thing, the last point that I want to get to, and then I'll be done. The peculiar institution of slavery has not been abolished, it's just been reformed. And it's done through the 13th and 14th Amendment. And that's what they call it, the peculiar institution of slavery, okay? So it's just been deceptively hidden. I think somebody ought to come up with an amendment that says slavery in all its forms are abolished. Why didn't they just say that? But here's what they did instead. Listen to this. And I understand legal lingo, so I understand how they're being tricky here. Section 1 of Amendment 13, which is the abolition of slavery. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the parties shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And then Section 2 says, Congress shall have the power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. I laugh. Slavery nor involuntary servitude except as punishment for a crime. How many crimes, according to these statutes, codes, municipal ordinances, executive orders, how many crimes are there out there? Bill, you probably commit 6 crimes, maybe 10 crimes a day technically. So that basically means that when you go into those courts, you may go out of it and you may have been charged with something and be a criminal. So what they're saying is that if that's considered a crime, if their legislation or their municipal ordinances are considered criminal acts, then you're considered a criminal and you can be put in slavery. And you do 6 of everybody does commit 6 of those so-called crimes a day. That's why everything after the 10th Amendment to me is BS. And I know that some of the founding fathers had slaves and they knew that was bad, and they're looking to us to fix it. And I take responsibility for that. Amendment 14. I'm going to just do the first section because I think that's what's kind of enslaving people. All persons born or naturalized in the United States, which is that corporation located in the District of Columbia that I showed earlier, I'll continue, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities, not rights, privileges or immunities of the citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdictions the equal protection of the laws. Now, at first, that actually sounds kind of good, right? But if you're subject to a jurisdiction, then you're a subject. You know, I'm not subject to anybody's. I'm not a subject. I'm a sovereign. And by the way, the word sovereign, if anybody asks you, sovereign comes from the word subare, and the Latin root words of subare and renum. Subare means above, and renum means rule or rulership. So sovereign actually means above rulership. It does not mean that you're some dictator telling people what to do. It just means you're not ruled by anybody. And that's what like I said, Chisholm versus Georgia, the people of the United States are sovereign, with no one to rule but themselves. And by the way, if the people weren't sovereign, then neither is government, because only a sovereign can delegate his powers. And by the way, that's why I expatriated as a U.S. citizen, and as a state citizen, because it's all gotten bad now, to be honest with you. I'm considered a minister. If you look in the Constitution, I'm a minister. I have the right to go travel anywhere. The right to travel is a common right. Like I said, I gave you those 3 things. But that's going to be a wrap. I think this is very important, and this isn't what I went over isn't exhaustive. It's just kind of a start, and I think it's important to understand these things because law is the most important. Everything is law. What happens in nature is law. This document to me was divinely inspired. It needs to be taken a little further, and I think it's up to some of us to do it. Did I miss anything? I think we're good. Thank you very much, and if anybody has any questions, I'm perfectly open to debate. It's like I always say, I never lose an argument. And the reason why is either because I'm right and somebody else gets to a higher truth, or I'm wrong and I get to a higher truth. Have a good one.